North Africa, July 1942. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, a sea of sand and stone baking under a sun that could crack paint and warp metal. Near the British forward supply depot at Mersa Matruh, 50 kilometers behind the front lines, rows of disabled tanks sat in silent formation. Sherman M4s with blown transmissions, Crusader 2s with seized engines, Valentine 9s missing treads, turrets, entire hull sections. This was the graveyard, the place where armor came to die. Sergeant Thomas Brennan walked between the hulks, a rag tied around his forehead to catch the sweat before it reached his eyes. He was 27 years old, broad-shouldered, with hands perpetually black from oil and carbon. Before the war, he had worked in a Manchester automobile factory. Now he worked miracles, or tried to. The British Eighth Army was bleeding machines faster than Cairo could replace them. Every engagement with Rommel's Afrika Korps left more steel corpses in the sand. The supply lines stretched across 2 continents. A replacement engine for a Sherman took 6 weeks to arrive from the United States. 6 weeks was a lifetime when Tobruk had already fallen and the enemy was pushing toward El Alamein. Brennan stopped in front of a Crusader III, its turret blown half off by an 88-meter round. The crew had bailed out successfully. The tank had not been so fortunate, but the engine compartment was intact. He knelt beside the access panel, pulling a wrench from his belt. Inside, the Liberty L-12 engine sat dark and silent, 400 horsepower when it ran. When it didn't, it was 1,800 pounds of dead weight. "Still working on that one, Sarge." Brennan glanced up. Private Hooper stood in the shade of a nearby Matilda, holding 2 canteens. The kid was 19, skinny as a rifle barrel, and assigned to Brennan's salvage team 3 weeks earlier. "Engine's good," Brennan said. "Transmission's gone. Fuel pumps cracked. Cooling systems got more holes than a London street after the Blitz. So it's scrap. Everything's scrap until it isn't." Brennan took a canteen and drank half of it in one pull. The water was warm, metallic, precious. He poured the rest over his head and felt it evaporate almost instantly. The problem wasn't just one tank, it was the entire philosophy of armor maintenance in a desert war. British tanks were designed for European terrain, green fields, paved roads, temperate climates. Here, sand infiltrated every seal, every filter, every bearing, engines overheated, tracks broke, oil turned to sludge, and the Germans knew how to fight in it. Rommel's Panzer IIIs and IVs were better suited to the environment. Their crews were experienced. Their supply lines, though stretched, were shorter. When a Panzer broke down, it was often back in action within hours. When a British tank failed, it was abandoned. Brennan had watched it happen too many times. A crew would lose their tank in combat, survive, get reassigned, then do it all again 2 weeks later in a different machine. The attrition wasn't just mechanical, it was psychological. He stood and walked to the next row. Here, the casualties were more recent. A Sherman M4A1 with American markings still visible under the dust. It had arrived from the port at Alexandria only 9 days earlier, been sent forward, engaged at Ruwaysat Ridge, and returned with a blown engine and a cracked transmission housing. 9 days. Brennan climbed onto the engine deck and opened the rear hatch. The smell hit him immediately. Burnt oil, overheated metal, scorched rubber. The Wright R975 radial engine sat in its compartment like a dead animal. He recognized the failure immediately. Cylinder head gasket blown. Coolant had flooded the crankcase. The engine had seized mid-battle. "Can you fix it?" Hooper called from below. "Not with what we've got." "So what do we do?" Brennan stared into the engine bay for a long moment. Around him, the salvage yard stretched in every direction. Dozens of tanks, hundreds of parts, thousands of components, all incompatible, all designed for different machines, different nations, different wars. But metal was metal, and desperation was the mother of invention. "We improvise," Brennan said quietly. The British armour situation in North Africa was not a mystery, it was mathematics. The Afrika Korps possessed approximately 200 operational tanks in July 1942. The Eighth Army possessed over 600. On paper, the British should have been winning. On the battlefield, they were retreating. The difference was not courage. British tank crews fought with determination, often to the point of self-sacrifice. The difference was machinery. German Panzer IIIs carried the 50mm KWK-38 cannon, later upgraded to the longer KWK-39. Effective range, 1,000 meters. Penetration, adequate against most British armour at combat distances. More critically, German tanks featured superior optics, better crew ergonomics, faster turret traverse, and engines that didn't disintegrate after 2 weeks in the sand. British Crusaders were fast but undergunned and mechanically fragile. Matildas were tough but slow. Valentines were reliable but weak. Shermans, now arriving in numbers, were promising but still learning the desert's cruelties. And then there was the 88. The German 80mm flak gun, repurposed as an anti-tank weapon, could destroy any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. It sat in the sand like a patient predator, invisible until it fired. By then, it was too late. Brennan had seen the results. Crews pulled from burning hulls, turrets blown 20 meters from their chassis, men who survived physically but stopped speaking for days afterward. The front needed tanks. Cairo kept promising reinforcements. The salvage depot kept receiving wrecks. Brennan's orders were simple: cannibalize non-repairable vehicles to keep marginally damaged ones operational. Strip parts, catalogue them, send the best machines back to the line. But the system was failing. 3 days earlier, a major from the Royal Armoured Corps had visited the depot. He walked the rows with Brennan, listening, nodding, saying nothing. At the end, he stood in the shade of a tarp stretched between 2 Valentines and spoke quietly. "We need 30 operational tanks within 2 weeks. Not promises, not repairs in progress. Operational. Can you do it?" Brennan looked across the graveyard. 50 disabled machines. Maybe 10 could be restored with conventional methods. Maybe. "I'll try, sir." "Trying isn't winning, Sergeant." The major left. Brennan stayed. That night, he sat on the engine deck of the blown Sherman, a notebook in his lap, a pencil stub in his hand. Around him, the desert cooled rapidly. Stars appeared in layers, so many they seemed to touch the sand. He began making lists. Engines: Liberty L12, Crusader. Nuffield Liberty, Crusader 2 the Threy. Meadows Dav, Valentine. GMC 6-71 Diesel, some Valentines. Wright R975, Sherman. Chrysler A57 Multibank, some Shermans. Transmissions: Nuffield, Merritt Brown. Synchromesh types: dry clutch, wet clutch. Fuel systems: gravity feed, mechanical pump, pressurized, cooling, liquid, air, hybrid. Every tank was a different puzzle. Every repair required specific parts. And the depot had fragments of everything, complete sets of nothing, but fragments could be combined. He stared at the Sherman's engine bay. The R975 was dead, but the transmission was intact. The fuel system was damaged, but salvageable. The cooling system was a ruin. 40 meters away sat the Crusader 3 with the blown turret. Its Liberty engine was functional. Its transmission was destroyed. Its cooling system was intact. Different engines, different mounts, different nations, but both were gasoline. Both were radial designs in their own way. Both produced similar horsepower. The idea came slowly, not as a flash of inspiration, but as a quiet accumulation of possibilities. What if compatibility didn't matter? What if you forced the pieces to fit? Brennan closed the notebook. He didn't sleep much that night. Morning came with the usual heat. Brennan assembled his team: Hooper, Corporal Davies, and Private McKellen. 3 men who knew tools, could weld, and didn't ask unnecessary questions. They stood beside the Sherman and the Crusader. Brennan explained nothing at first. He simply pointed. "We're pulling the Liberty out of the Crusader. We're putting it in the Sherman." Davies blinked. "Sarge, that's not possible." "I know. We're doing it anyway." The first problem was physical space. The Sherman's engine bay was designed for the Wright R975, a 9-cylinder radial. The Liberty L12 was a V12, longer, heavier, mounted differently. The bolt patterns didn't match. The transmission interface didn't match. The cooling lines didn't match. Nothing matched. Brennan didn't care. They started with extraction. Using a block and tackle rigged from a salvaged crane arm, they lifted the Liberty out of the Crusader. 8 hours of work under the sun. Bolts seized from sand, cables fraying. The engine finally came free, swinging gently in the desert air, oil dripping onto the sand. They lowered it beside the Sherman. "Now what?" McKellen asked. "Now we make it fit." The process was part engineering, part butchery. They removed the Sherman's engine mounts entirely, then fabricated new ones from steel plate scavenged from a destroyed Valentine's hull. Brennan sketched the design in the sand with a stick, a hybrid cradle that would hold the Liberty's block while interfacing with the Sherman's frame rails. Davies was the best welder. He worked for 2 days straight, joining plates, reinforcing joints, testing fitment. The result was ugly, brutal, functional. The engine dropped into place. Then came the transmission. The Sherman's Spicer unit was designed for the R975's output shaft. The Liberty's shaft was a different diameter, different spline count, different everything. Brennan solved it with an adapter plate machined from a chunk of steel taken from a blown Crusader gearbox housing. McKellen spent 16 hours with a handfile and a grinding wheel, shaping the metal by eye, checking fitment every 30 minutes. When he was done, his hands were shaking. The plate weighed 8 kilograms and looked like it had been chewed by rats. But it mated the Liberty's output to the Sherman's transmission input. "Will it hold?" Hooper asked. "We'll find out," Brennan said. Fuel was simpler. They spliced lines from 3 different tanks, using rubber hose and hose clamps looted from a wrecked supply truck. The fuel pump came from a Valentine. The filter housing came from a Matilda. The carburetor came from the Crusader, modified with brass fittings hammered flat and drilled to size. Cooling was the nightmare. The Liberty ran hot. The Sherman's cooling system was designed for a different engine, different flow rates, different thermal load. Brennan knew if they simply connected the lines, the engine would overheat within minutes. They needed additional capacity. He found it in a destroyed Crusader II, an auxiliary oil cooler, still intact. They mounted it externally, strapping it to the Sherman's rear deck with wire and brackets welded from scrap. Then they plumbed it into the Liberty's coolant loop using copper tubing scavenged from a blown fuel bowser. The result looked like something built by a madman. Pipes jutted at strange angles. Welds were uneven. Paint was non-existent, just bare metal and rust and improvisation. But it was complete. Brennan stood back and stared at it. The Sherman sat low on its suspension, the extra weight of the Liberty noticeable even at rest. The engine bay was a chaos of mismatched parts. The external cooler gleamed dully in the sun. "Does it run?" Davies asked. "Only one way to know." They filled the tank with fuel, topped off the coolant, checked the oil. Brennan climbed into the driver's position. The interior smelled of old sweat and hot metal. He primed the fuel system, checked the gauges, half of which no longer read correctly, and pressed the starter. The engine cranked, once, twice, then it caught. The Liberty roared to life, a deep, angry sound that echoed off the surrounding wrecks. Smoke poured from the exhaust. The entire tank shook. Brennan could feel the vibration through the seat, the floor, the controls. He let it idle for 30 seconds. The temperature gauge climbed. then stabilized. He throttled up. The engine responded smoothly, RPMs rising, power building. He throttled back. The engine settled. McKellen was laughing. Davies was staring. Hooper looked like he'd seen a ghost. Brennan shut it down and climbed out. "We need to test it under load," he said quietly. They didn't have a track to test on. They had something better. They had a war. The request came through official channels, which meant someone had noticed. A captain from the 7th Armoured Brigade arrived at the depot the next morning in a Humber Scout car, dusty and impatient. "I heard you got a Sherman running," he said without preamble. "Yes, sir. We've got a convoy moving to forward positions tomorrow. It needs escort. 2 operational Shermans are being pulled from reserve. I'm told you can provide a third." Brennan hesitated. The hybrid had run for 10 minutes. That was all. No field testing, no sustained operation, no combat load. "She's not regulation, sir." "Nothing out here is regulation, Sergeant." "Can she fight?" "Yes, sir." "Then get her ready." The convoy departed at 600 hours. 3 supply lorries carrying ammunition, water and rations. 2 Shermans from the reserve pool, both standard M4A1s with Wright engines, and Brennan's hybrid, crewed by volunteers from the salvage team. Brennan drove. Davies manned the bowgun. McKellen loaded the 75 mm. Hooper took the commander's position, though none of them had trained for actual combat roles. They rolled east toward the front, following the coastal track. The morning was cool, almost pleasant. The hybrid ran smoothly, engine temperature holding steady, transmission shifting without complaint. The external cooler rattled slightly but stayed secure. 30 kilometers out, the terrain changed. Rocky outcrops appeared. Wadis cut across the landscape. This was the disputed zone, where patrols from both sides ranged freely, where ambushes happened in silence and disappeared into the heat shimmer. The lead Sherman's commander, a lieutenant named Harrington, came over the radio. "All stations, keep spacing, eyes open. Intelligence reports enemy reconnaissance active in this sector." Brennan acknowledged. He could feel the tension in the crew. They were mechanics, not tankers. But the gun was loaded. The engine ran. That would have to be enough. At kilometer 42, the world exploded. The lead lorry detonated in a fountain of sand and fire. A mine buried in the track, triggered by its front wheels. The vehicle flipped onto its side, burning. Immediately, machine gun fire erupted from the rocks to the north. German MG-34s, 2 of them, positioned in a shallow wadi 300 meters out. Tracers cut across the column. "Contact north!" Harrington's voice, sharp and clear. "Shermans, engage!" The 2 reserve Shermans pivoted, turrets traversing. Brennan reacted on instinct, hauling the hybrid off the track and turning to face the threat. The Liberty engine roared, responding instantly. The Sherman surged forward, faster than he expected, the extra power from the hybrid engine translating directly to speed. "Gunner, target machine gun position, 3 o'clock, 300 meters." McKellen swung the turret. The mechanical traverse was slow, agonizingly slow. The machine guns kept firing. Rounds pinged off the hull. Then McKellen found them. "Identified! Fire!" The 75 mm Pierce cannon bellowed. The shell struck low, detonating in the wadi 20 meters short. Sand and rock erupted. "Adjust! Up 50!" McKellen corrected. Fired again. This time the shell hit directly. The first machine gun position disappeared in smoke and debris. The second gun kept firing, now targeting the hybrid. Brennan felt rounds hammering the turret face, the glacis plate. He pushed the throttle forward, closing the distance. The Sherman accelerated hard, the Liberty pulling with a ferocity the Wright could never match. "Engaging!" Davies opened up with the bowgun, long bursts, suppressing. Brass casings clattered around Brennan's feet. At 200 meters, McKellen fired a third time. The second MG position vanished. Silence fell. Brennan braked. The hybrid slid to a stop, engine idling, ticking. Smoke drifted across the battlefield. The burning lorry crackled. No further fire came from the wadi. Harrington's voice crackled over the radio. "Confirm enemy neutralized. All stations. Report status." The 2 reserve Shermans were intact. The remaining lorries were intact. The hybrid sat in the sand, external cooler steaming slightly, engine still running. Brennan checked the gauges, temperature high but stable, oil pressure good, transmission temperature within limits. "We're operational," he reported. The convoy continued. They reached the forward supply point without further contact. The lorries unloaded. The Shermans refueled. Harrington walked over to the hybrid, staring at the external cooler, the mismatched welds, the improvised plumbing. "What the hell am I looking at, Sergeant?" "A Sherman, sir." "That's not a standard engine." "No, sir." Harrington circled the tank slowly. He stopped at the engine deck, peering into the bay. "You put a Crusader engine in an American tank?" "Yes, sir." "Does Cairo know about this?" "No, sir." Harrington was silent for a long moment. Then he smiled, just slightly. "Good. Don't tell them. Just keep building them." Word spread faster than Brennan anticipated. Within a week, 2 more hybrid Shermans rolled out of the salvage depot. Within a month, 7, each one different. Each one wrong by every regulation in the British Army manual, and each one devastating. The hybrids weren't just functional, they were superior. The Liberty engine, designed for British tanks but now liberated from British transmissions and cooling systems, provided more power than the Wright in the Sherman's heavier frame. The result was faster acceleration, better hill climbing, improved tactical mobility. Crews who received them initially complained. The engine sounded different. The controls felt strange. The external coolers looked like they would fall off. Then they fought. At Alam Halfa, a hybrid Sherman knocked out 2 Panzer IIIs at ranges exceeding 800 meters, maneuvering faster than the German gunners could track. At El Alamein, 3 hybrids led a night advance, their engines running cooler and quieter than standard Shermans, allowing them to close within killing range before being detected. The crews stopped complaining. They started requesting them. By October 1942, the salvage depot at Mersa Matruh had become an unofficial factory. Brennan's team had grown to 20 men. They worked around the clock, pulling engines, fabricating mounts, welding, splicing, improvising. The depot's official reports listed them as repaired Shermans. Technically true, practically revolutionary. Rommel's forces began encountering something unexpected. British tanks that didn't behave as predicted. Faster, more aggressive, harder to kill. They called them mongrels. The name stuck. Cairo noticed eventually. A delegation arrived in November, led by a brigadier from Ordnance Corps. They walked the rows of hybrids with expressions ranging from confusion to horror. Brennan was ordered to explain the modifications. He did, completely, holding nothing back. The brigadier stared at a completed hybrid for 5 full minutes. Then he turned to his staff. "Get this to Engineering Command. I want a full technical assessment. If it's viable, I want production guidelines written." "Sir," one of the staff officers said carefully, "these modifications violate standardization protocols. They're not field repairable by conventional methods. They're winning battles," the brigadier interrupted. "Write the guidelines." The hybrids never became official. No manual was published. No factory production began. But the practice spread. Other depots began experimenting. Other sergeants began improvising. By 1943, hybrid tanks of various configurations, Crusader engines in Shermans, Valentine components in Matildas, even captured German parts in British hulls, were operating across North Africa and into Italy. They were never spoken of in official dispatches. They appeared in no technical manuals, but they existed, and they fought. Brennan continued working until the North African campaign ended. He was rotated back to England in late 1943, promoted to warrant officer, assigned to a training depot in Yorkshire. He taught mechanics, welding, improvisation. He never spoke publicly about the hybrids. Years later, a military historian researching British armour modifications found a single reference in a salvage depot logbook from July 1942. Sherman 4A1, 237, engine replaced, non-standard components utilised, returned to service. No elaboration, no technical details, just that single line. The historian attempted to trace the tank's service record. It had fought at Alam Halfa, El Alamein and Tobruk. It had been disabled twice, repaired both times, and finally destroyed by an 80 Meton round in Tunisia in March 1943. Crew survived. Tank did not. By then, it had travelled over 4,000 kilometres, engaged in 11 major actions, and destroyed 6 enemy vehicles, all on an engine that was never supposed to fit. The historian published a brief paper on the incident, noting it as an interesting example of field ingenuity. The paper was read by approximately 200 people and then forgotten. But in a storage facility outside Manchester, there is a worn notebook filled with pencil sketches, parts lists, and improvised calculations. It was donated anonymously in 1989, labelled only as North Africa, 1942. On the last page, in handwriting faded but still legible, someone had written, "When the book says it can't be done, throw away the book. The war doesn't care about the manual. It cares about what works." Beneath it, in smaller letters, 43 hybrids built, 31 returned to service, 12 confirmed kills, 0 catastrophic engine failures. The notebook sits in an archive box, unread for decades, but the principle remains. Desperation forces innovation. Necessity ignores regulations. And sometimes, when everything is falling apart, a sergeant with a wrench and a graveyard full of broken machines can change the mathematics of war, not by following the rules, but by remembering that metal is metal, and ingenuity is survival.